Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Africa I Share platform. My name is Amanda Manyame, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. Today's discussion is on access to the internet and affordability in Africa. And it's actually interesting. I think the moment you say internet access or access to the internet, you already start thinking of a number of things, but we put in the word affordability in there as well, because that is one of the key issues that comes about when it comes to accessing the internet in Africa. And in today's discussion, we're going to have Nashi Longo. We're also going to have Sigi, and we're going to have Bram. So I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves in 2 minutes. I will time you guys. So as well accomplished as you are, you have to try just keep it to 2 minutes. And after you introduce yourselves, I will then take over from there. I will start with Nashi Longo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nashilongo Gervasius Nakale. I am based in Windhoek in Namibia. For a little period. I'm headed to London in a few days. I am a ICT policy analyst, researcher. That's one. And then I teach media and communication and information at the University of Namibia. I founded the Internet Society, the Namibia chapter here a few years ago, and I'm heavily also involved in the internet governance processes in the country. So basically that. I'm also one of the new fellows of the. Is it the fellows? Yeah, I'm one of the new open internet leaders fellows for and of course an AfriSig fellow of 2019 and so many other ones. But let me end there.
Okay, that's great. Nice to meet you, Nash Longo. Sigi, you can go next.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Nashilongo. Hi, everyone. And thank you to Amanda and to the Africa iShare platform for organizing this extremely crucial conversation. My name is Sigi Waiguma Mwanzia. You can spell that with an S, I-G-I. It's a name that just really confuses many people. I am a digital policy consultant. I am also a lawyer. I work at the intersection between law, technology, and policy. I am also currently leading the Digital Rights Department at Article 19 Eastern Africa. So that's the Eastern African branch of the global Article 19, where we defend and promote freedom of expression and access to information in 14 Eastern African countries across the region. Just to really shorten my introduction, I was previously a 2019 Google Public Policy Fellow, as well as an AfriSig Fellow as Nashilongo Magnified. Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome. Yes, AfriSig Fellows from 2019. I feel there's a little bit of bias here, and I have two women on the panel, one gentleman. Bram, you can go introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. I am Bram Fujulani from Malawi, and I am currently the president of the ICT Association of Malawi. I am also the trainer for the Internet Governance Forum at the African Union through the PRIDA program. The chairperson of the Malawi Internet Governance Forum, but I'm also a fellow for ICANN and ISOC. I think I would cut it there and join the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, everyone. And I will not lie, everyone on this panel is truly well accomplished. They've achieved so much, and they're well versed in the topic that we're going to be discussing today. If anyone has any questions, you can pop them onto the Twitter platform as well as onto the LinkedIn platform if you are using the LinkedIn platform. And it's Africa I Share on both platforms. So I will pop right in. Um, I must say, when I organized this panel, I wanted to have someone with a technical background, that's Bram, because I wanted someone to explain to us what actually happens on the back end of accessing internet? Like, what does it all mean? Then I wanted to hear from someone with a legal background, that is Sigi, to explain to us policies, regulations. What does it mean from the legal perspective, from the law side of it all? And then I wanted to have someone with I don't like saying background for Nashilongo because I feel you transcend. But then you have a very strong civil society background, and you also have an understanding from a user-based perspective of what internet access is. So that's why I had a different people, different skill sets coming onto this panel so that we can get different ideas regarding the issue of internet access and affordability in Africa. So obviously the first question is, from each of you and from your different expertise, what is internet access? I will start with Nashilongo. Reason being, I want to understand from a user's perspective, a civil society perspective, a human rights perspective, what is access to the internet?
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda, once again for this question. Um, so basically, from a user perspective, internet access means the ability to use the internet from wherever you find yourself. Um, the definition or the accessibility itself is can be defined, can be widely defined for a number of reasons. But from research or the tangible perspective, it really means that for me, for me to define internet access, I have to think about um, is it available for me? One for me to be able to access it. So yes, in some cases it is available. Say for instance, I'm in Windhoek and there's 4G, and in that case I will it is available, so I could access it, but I can only access it if, obviously, like you've mentioned, the affordability point of it, like can I afford to access it? That's one. The other is that, do I have a device that can connect to it? That's the other aspect of accessibility. But can also that device access, is it compatible to get me to the internet? So there's a lot of other things on how you can describe it, but from a single perspective, from a very non-technical perspective, it's really to say that I have an internet. Well, I have a device. I had bought credit. So I don't know what it would be referring to it in other countries, and I am able to buy the data that then allows me to access the internet. So basically, that would be what internet access would mean, or would be for from that perspective. But it really entails a number of things, and I hope that we get a chance as we go on to really look at some of those things as I have them. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nashilongo. Bram, I will come to you. What does internet access look like from a technical perspective? Bram, you're currently muted.
Really? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
That's better. Yes, I was saying, from the technical point of view, internet accessibility and affordability, maybe the affordability aspect would be a little bit silent, because from the technical point of view, everyone cares about ensuring that the end user is connected, and whether that will cost them a lot of money, that is the bottom line of business. But when you talk about the accessibility, is the ability to interconnect with other bigger network around the world, from connecting to that cable that is from the sea, bringing the content in the country, and putting a lot of infrastructure in between to make sure that that connectivity goes to the last mile, the end user in the rural area. And they don't care about whatever is happening in the background. All the end user is concerned about is when they go and click Google, it should be there. And therefore, from the technical point of view, you have to ensure that the security, resilience, and all the parameters that brings good user experience, whether that means hosting some of the content, major content like Facebook, YouTube, in country, and pairing with some of the largest transit providers, that all that I think is considered making sure that there's internet accessibility wherever the end user is located.
Thank you so much for that response. And same thing with Nashilongo. You're already touching on some of the issues that we're going to discuss later on in this discussion. Coming to you, Sigi, what does internet access look like from legal perspective? And I'll also throw in from a human rights perspective, because you're at 19 and you work with human rights.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so grateful that you magnified the civil society and human rights perspective. But I think just generally speaking, the internet is a free resource, which is, from a legal perspective, it's guaranteed in so many constitutional provisions. It is guaranteed and protected in a lot of international frameworks, including the International Covenant on civil and political rights, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the African Charter from a regional perspective, and so legally speaking, I think that there has been a recognition that the internet is such a pervasive and a global resource, and that there are certain aspects which need to be regulated, which need to be legislated in order to, not just to protect the interests of individuals who are accessing these either the internet or digital platforms, but also because it necessarily brings numerous stakeholders to the forefront. So we have public entities. Here I'm referring to the government. We have private actors who, just to contextualize it, for example, need to set up a mobile network, and so these are some of the circumstances where regulation and legislation becomes especially pertinent. From a government perspective, I suppose there is the need to regulate some of the services to promote competition, which I suppose are things that we will touch on much later. So yeah, just from a legal perspective, most countries often have a regulator. So Kenya has the Communications Authority of Kenya, which regulates and provides for a lot of policies and strategies affecting internet access issues. From a civil society / human rights perspective, I think what I really wanted to magnify is that from a historical perspective, internet access paints a very beautiful story about our evolution as human beings, about our ability to use our intellectual capacities to develop essentially what are interconnected systems which are capable of transmitting information at excessively high speeds and promoting interconnectedness, essentially leading to what we now refer to as the global village. But I think that this question, depending, as Nashilongo and Bram have noted, it depends essentially on the perspective that you're looking at it from. I think, in my opinion, asking what internet access looks like is similar to asking what does a reliable electricity supply or what does access to running water look like. In my opinion, internet access is a fundamental human right, especially in the increasingly digitized world that we now find ourselves in. I think one of the paradoxes of this extremely beautiful story is that, especially when you contextualize it, including in the current circumstances, the COVID circumstances that we find ourselves in, is that individuals' ability to gain access to the internet today brings to the forefront a very stark paradox, right, between those who have and those who do not have. From Article 19's perspective, internet access essentially promotes or increases the spaces for individuals to be able to shape their economic circumstances, to be able to exercise their political rights, to access online education services, to protest about injustices or poor services by providers. For us, having access is equivalent to being able to make an informed choice. It is about being able to exercise your ability to, to dignity, to be able to empower not just yourself, but also your community. So in sum, that is what internet access looks like from those two perspectives.
Thanks so much for that. I like that you highlighted the fact that it is a human right, but the reason it is a human right is because it facilitates a platform for citizens in the different countries to be able to exercise their different human rights. For example, where you want to complain about the government in your country not doing something or doing something great, because I think sometimes we complain, but we can also praise on the internet. We can also discuss as a global village. We can see what is happening in the next country, and we see maybe this is best practice, maybe it's not. So that's one of the reasons why you could say internet is definitely a human right. And listening to everything that Bram, Nashlonga, and Yusigi have said, it seems there are a number of factors that play into people being able to access the internet. So, Nashlonga, you touched a bit on some of those factors. So I would like you to go into some of the factors, but I would like you to, at the very least, highlight two key factors that seem to be of concern in Africa at the moment, particularly with COVID-19. And you can use country-specific cases if you'd like to.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you again to my co-panelists for bringing out all those important aspects to this discussion. So some of the key issues defining the connectivity of the internet in this particular time is one, I think the issue that is the digital divide. I think the digital divide has exposed the issue of non-connectivity connectivity in Africa. So that's a digital divide, but also issues of infrastructure to connect to the internet. I think those specifically stood out for us in Namibia. And I will say this because, of course, the issue of affordability will never be left behind when it comes to rights-based approach to the internet. So we found that a lot of times, even when internet is available, not a lot of people can afford the internet. For instance, in Namibia, the internet, a gig of internet, which is your basic package to be able to do something meaningful on the internet, cost 8% of an average income household in Namibia. That's a lot of money for a lot of Namibians, especially given the fact that Namibia, for one, is one of the countries with a high income disparities in the amongst, I think, on the continent, if it's not amongst the highest on the continent. So that's one. So affordability, a lot of people cannot afford the internet. That's one. Two, we found that especially during COVID that the infrastructure that Bram has mentioned, that connectivity from the WACS, which is your cable, your undersea cable, to get to your tower, to get to your phone, that infrastructure, that mostly unseen infrastructure, could not handle the pressures, especially in the residential areas. We found that when there was a lockdown, for instance, here in Namibia, and people could not be in the usual working spaces, where in the CBDs, mostly in the offices, but then stepped back and stayed at home and try and do the work as home, as largely seen with remote working. People were just not able to connect to the internet from home. It was very frustrating space or atmosphere to witness during this time of COVID. I think this speaks to priorities in terms of connectivity by the telcos or by the ISPs, who are the internet service providers. That's the one thing. But the digital divide as the other aspect, and I think this really uh, encompass everything in relation to the urban rural digital divide, really exposed how unprepared our economies or our communities are in relation to being connected. That, for instance, in Namibia, where obviously e-learning was introduced countrywide as an intervention, not as an intervention, as a mean of providing education from primary or even from pre-primary all the way to the university. We found that a lot of people just could not access the internet. For instance, I work at the university, like I've mentioned before, and our university, like my students, I usually see them face to face here in the main campus in Windhoek, and because of COVID, many had to return to their respective regions or homes, and you found that at least 60% to 70% of the classroom could not access the internet, could not do anything during that period, because one, either the connectivity in their area was not very reliable. Again, that speaks to the issues of infrastructure, but also that in the areas, even though they had your smartphone, um, your smartphone that would help you to access things online, it the internet was not available. That's one. The other was also the issue of affording, being able to buy data to connect to that internet. It was also came up very, very strongly. In the end, the university had to call students to come to implement those measures and make up classes for those students. So we see also largely, for instance, within the usual education system, which is your primary, pre-primary to grade 12, that, for instance, in Namibia, where over, I think, 300 schools have no connectivity to electricity, for starters, water and electricity, those students, those many students, could not be reached with internet access, for instance. So largely, you see that we had a margin of students who, from March to September, did not access education at all, and that speaks to the issues of just the internet affordability, but also availability, which is really the access issues that we're talking about. So I don't know if that sums up your questions, Amanda. Issues of infrastructure, the rural-urban digital divide. I don't know what I mentioned earlier. Is that affordability in terms of yeah. So basically, those are some of the issues that must have featured also very largely on the continent, given that only 40%, was it 40%? Only 40% of the continent inhabitants have access to the internet. But again, it's really mobile that we are talking about, and mobile, as we know, is not your most reliable mean of being productive on the internet, especially when you have to do. Think of a student who have to do a project online. Can they really do it on a cell phone, a Samsung, two generations below, and be meaningfully produce a project that would give them a grade that is higher than a credit? I think those are really some of the issues that stood out, especially during COVID. Of course, I didn't mention issues of data protection and data privacy during that time, because that's also another aspect um, to the approach on internet, on human rights approach to the internet. But I mean, don't even think about your rights first. Think about first getting onto the internet, being able to do to be meaningful and produce research, produce an essay, produce being in constantly taking part in discussions in Zoom classes. I think those were the biggest challenges, especially during COVID.
Thank you so much for that, Nashilongo. And I was also going to highlight the fact that before we even get to the cybersecurity, while you're on the internet, issues around data protection, issues around cyber harassment, the biggest concern in Africa seems to be getting onto the internet. I like to think of myself as
Correct.
being privileged because I am able to get onto the internet. But during the lockdown here in South Africa, I have to say I have switched between three different internet service providers purely because it has been difficult to work remotely. I have not had a stable internet connection, but this is me speaking from a privileged perspective. I know there are individuals that are not even able to get onto the internet for the number of reasons that you have highlighted. So, Bram, what is internet access to you? What are the issues that came up during the COVID-19 lockdown? Nashilong mentioned the issues around the digital divide, internet infrastructure, and affordability. So why is it that people like me that would normally have a steady stream of internet were struggling to get good internet connectivity during this period? And can you also talk about the issues around freeing up of zero rating certain platforms, what goes into that,
Yeah.
and you're looking at the cost perspective as well?
Yes, thank you so much. So I think our issues, if you listen from Nashilongo's intervention, they are not far from each other. In Malawi, we saw the same issues. What COVID did, I would like to think of it as you know, we have had conversations, especially in Africa. We've had um, conversations on the need for government to create and push for laws that brings the true digital inclusion. You know, making sure that the majority of Africans that live in rural areas should have access to the internet. And for a very long time, I think we've had difficulties in proving or in getting governments to understand why that is crucial and is important. So what COVID did was to pretty much sort of prove to us and to the policymakers to say, look, I think we need to get everyone connected, because when the schools were shut, were closed, and the schools were grappling with the issue of trying to bring classes online, we then realized and discovered that not every student has a gadget that would allow them to connect. And even if we and even if we had that arrangement where you are saying the bundles are, they're zero rated. So if you want to access the education content, all that is zero rated. Still, the students, most of the students, majority of the students did not have a gadget that would allow them to go on the internet. So that is one of the things that I think we share with experience in Namibia, and I'm sure it's most of the African countries as well. In terms of our infrastructure to be able to handle the demand, because um, I was looking at one of the major telecom companies in Malawi. They issued a report recently that their profit on data only went up by 55%. And I'm sure that is contributed due to the fact that the COVID brought a demand in getting pretty much almost a lot of people connecting and making sure that they are able to carry out their businesses through online engagement. And that alone tells you that, I mean, the economic side of it, but you still had issues with those people from rural areas to be able to continue with their day-to-day life, whether it's education or businesses. We did not have challenges with the resources in terms of whether the demand of the capacity compromised the services. And I'm sure that is due to the fact that as much as we have seen profits going up and numbers of people connected in Malawi going up, that is not still translating to a larger percentage of the total Malawians that actually are impacted and are able to go on the internet and carry out their day-to-day lives and businesses. And part of that is what Nachilongo actually spoke about. You cannot bring about the issue of affordability um, when you have not addressed the issue of access to a gadget that has the ability to connect someone to the internet. So one of the things that we saw, I think, happening is a movement that was even joined by some of the high-profile people, even the Minister of Information, who joined the movement of data must fall, due to the fact that I think we saw that people were complaining that the data prices are too high, that not everyone would afford, and so what that conversation did was it actually translated into the regulator summoning all the operators and saying, look, I think you really need to look into your pricing and at least bring down the cost, and which in some aspects they did, but again, we go back to the same issue about availability and affordability of the actual gadget themselves. Because once we address that problem, then we're not going to talk about the smaller numbers of people being able to connect to the internet. The last bit that I want to also put across is last week I attended the SADC Internet Exchange Point conference, and I think through various presenters from the SADC region, there are few countries that actually experienced a surge in the demand for internet. So Angola was one of them. I saw the Angola internet exchange point uh, explaining how they had to upgrade their infrastructure to cope up with the demand of the content through the COVID-19 period. And I think that is a good thing because it means that they were pushing, bigger volumes of content during the COVID-19, which I think most of the African countries were able to push, and due to the demand of the data connectivity across the region. But I think as far as Malawi is concerned, those are the major experiences that we had, and I think it's an ongoing conversation on how do we move forward even post COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bram. And I'm going to put you on the spot here because I've been accused by some of my family members of always using the jargon within this internet governance space. What is an internet exchange point? And would you know how many we have on the continent?
Yes, thank you so much. It's very important. So, internet exchange points, take it as, in a layman's language, take it as an airport. You know, at the airport, you have different flights coming in, dropping passengers, picking passengers. Um, but what that does is that you have from the airport you have local flights that are flying local. So if you're in South Africa, for example, to OR Tambo, you'd have flights that are just flying between Johannesburg and Cape Town. That is local traffic. You know, they're just flying within. And then, but for me, from Malawi, I'll have to fly into OR Tambo for me to get a flight to London, for example, or to United States of America, Europe. So the same concept is applied within the internet exchange point where, but now instead of flights, we're talking about the internet traffic. So if you're in Joburg and you're sending an email to someone who is in Cape Town, this would be considered local traffic. There's no need for this traffic to go to London and then come back into Cape Town because it's very expensive, and I think it will take time than if you just send it directly from Joburg to Cape Town. So that is the concept of internet exchange points. And the fact, the reason why we are promoting the internet exchange point is so that the exchange of this traffic. So if I'm trying to access content that is hosted in Kenya, for example, why must I go through London and then come back into Kenya when I can just directly exchange my traffic with someone who is going to Kenya directly? That has so many advantages to the internet end user in terms of the speed experiences, I think they'll experience greater speeds if I am just exchanging directly with someone in Kenya. They'll experience also the pricing is going to be a bit cheaper because you must remember people charge for carrying traffic from one place to the other, and that is why actually internet is expensive in other quarters because of the issues of routing and exchange traffic across the region. In terms of how many we have in the region, I don't have the number on top of my head, but I can come back on that. I think before we close the session, we'll give the actual number of how many IXPs we have in Africa.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. I actually really understood it now. And it makes a lot of sense that internet would be expensive if we are routing, if you have to go through many different points for you to get access to data or something that you want to access off of the internet. Moving on to Siggy, Bram kind of threw you under the bus there when he spoke about the regulator's role in ensuring that they deal with the prices of data, the cost of data, that is the cost of accessing the internet. So that is the one question: what role do the regulators play, as well as what role do laws play in making sure that, firstly, data is not expensive? That is the first thing. And then secondly, making sure that people are protected while they're on the internet.
Thank you, Amanda. I think I'll deal with the first question, which was about the issue of regulation. So I think one of the core roles that regulators play is to maintain and entrench trust between not just the government, but also amongst private entities who are seeking to facilitate and expand a reliable internet access in a particular country. But then there's also as you mentioned, and I guess this touches on the second question, there's also the role the importance of maintaining trust between end users, private entities, and governments themselves. So the role that regulators play is to, one, tackle, and this is one of the big issues in terms of factors that affect access to a reliable and a sustainable internet connectivity, is the issue of barriers to entry for private entities. So one of the common issues that consistently keeps popping up is the issue of licensing, of taxation, spectrum allocation practices as well, that are promoted by the government. And so in this particular context, the regulator, in maintaining a balance essentially between the government's twin goals of trying to, one, promote internet access, but also trying to expand its taxation base, plays a very important role in terms of balancing the kind of costs that are borne by mobile network operators or internet service providers. And this then consequently affects the kind of service that the end user essentially receives. In terms of the spectrum allocation challenge, we know that spectrum is one of the core resources that is, one, not just scarcely available, but also especially important in terms of ensuring that individuals gain access to this thing that we call the internet. So one of the core roles that the regulator plays in this particular context is to ensure that entities who have been allocated spectrum don't hoard it, right? So that they use it according to the rules and regulations that have been stipulated by the regulator, but also ensuring that they are maximizing that particular use and ensuring that specific individuals who are, I don't say marginalized, but traditionally excluded, that priority is allocated in that particular sector. One of the other roles that the regulator plays is, and in a majority of countries, a lot of countries have what is known as a universal service or a universal access funding mechanism, which plays a really important role in terms of expanding access to the internet. And this is one of the areas where private entities and governments come together, because this fund is typically managed by the regulator, and operators then provide a certain contribution to this particular fund. So this is one of the areas where you can see clearly trust and collaboration between these two partners is extremely crucial in order to ensure that individuals in underserved areas, in unserved areas, and in rural communities are able to gain access to the internet. In terms of your second question, and Amanda, please, do you mind just repeating the question just so I can answer it correctly?
Okay, so my question had to do with regulation. You did touch on it a little bit, but could you explain how legislation and regulation could assist in ensuring access to the internet and the issue of affordability as well?
Sorry, I was struggling to find my my microphone button. So legislation plays as I mentioned before, it plays a really important role in terms of creating an enabling environment for all of these entities to come together and operate with the ultimate goal of ensuring that individuals can gain access to the internet. I think one of the, here I'll speak about the issue of, I've obviously alluded to the issue of taxation. We are seeing taxation measures increasingly reducing the ability of users to access the internet and reducing, or rather heightening the costs and consequently preventing many individuals' abilities to access the internet. And then this consequently affects, this perception of the internet as a luxury good, which is one of the core issues that I think a majority of digital rights proponents have been trying to break down. So from that particular perspective, governments are playing both a positive and an extremely negative role in terms of providing legislation that either contributes towards an enabling internet environment or contributes towards an extremely restrictive environment where and one of the things that we're noticing is that some of this legislation is actually preventing, or rather, there's a phrase that Mozilla used, excluding those who have already gained access to the internet, which is one of the issues that digital taxation legislation really affects. So just to contextualize, in Kenya, we have been pushing for, or they're not pushing for, there are already implemented legislative and regulatory frameworks that impose I'm not sure, I can't remember what the rate is. I think it's 0.5%. And this particular tax applies to goods and services. It was introduced last year. We've seen countries such as Uganda imposing the over-the-top taxation, which significantly affected individuals' ability in Uganda to access the internet in an affordable manner, which then consequently resulted in individuals using back-end means to gain access to the internet in order to not pay this particular taxation. So legislation does promote and regulation does promote accessibility and affordability, but there are also numerous instances where it significantly impacts this affordability and accessibility, and consequently negatively affects what we like to refer to as nascent digital economies on the African continent.
Thank you so much for that. And I liked that statement, excluding those that have already gained access to the internet. And I feel that is what is definitely happening on the continent, that we are trying to get more people to have access to the internet. At the same time as data costs go up, you are excluding individuals that would naturally be able to access the internet, but cannot afford the cost of being on the internet. And I'm speaking about us moving towards a internet-centric world where there's like the Internet of Things. You have your smartwatch, you're watching TV, internet-based TV and all of that. But with the cost of data, you cannot do that. So naturally, you'll be able to access the internet, but you can't do that because it becomes extremely expensive for you to do it. And then we also go back to the fact that we have individuals that cannot even afford to buy things like a smartphone for them to be able to access the internet. Speaking of that, okay, I think we should go on to issues around the gender digital divide. And I will throw this question to Nashilongo, and then I will also ask Sigi to pick it up. And I just want you guys to talk us through what is the gender digital divide. And in discussing this, can you explain what are the issues that you have noted in your respective countries and across the continent as a whole? Nashilongo, you can start, then Sigi will follow through. Nashilongo, you are on mute.
Unmute. Oh, thank you, Amanda. So the gender digital divide is literally just a term that is being used to define the gap between men and women who access the internet. Literally, also then the term would refer to women, not just women who can access the internet. It's now between the women and the men who cannot access the internet. Globally, women, there's been research that has proven that women are less likely to access the internet. That's a global level, and there's a number of reasons for that. The issue of pay inequalities globally, that's one. But also, two, we know that the majority of women already don't have income. It's mostly when it comes to poverty levels, it's usually women who are higher up on the poverty rates. That means that more men have a better income or have better sources on finding incomes. The other reason is also that maybe at personal level, if I have to contextualize that, it would be like if it would be me and maybe a brother of mine or a cousin who's of literally the same age, or a friend who's of the same age. We have the same amount of children, for instance, and we earn the same. For a man, he will have to he doesn't have to think twice about whether to buy data or to buy bread for his children, because he knows his wife will obviously take care of that. So it goes all the way to that level about who can buy data, who can access the internet, and what are the income levels, and what are the household specific. It the term itself, it really just a blanket to consider all of those things. For Namibia, our gender digital divide, I think, stood about. We did a research that we launched a few months ago with the Internet Society, the Namibia chapter. I don't have the data, but I think our gender digital gap, digital gender divide, stands around 13.6, if it's not 16.3. I'm just missing that up. Once again, that's for a lot of reasons. Maybe it's women who are mostly finding themselves in rural areas, and in rural areas data is not available even just for selling, but also connectivity issues, like you are just in a blind spot, or you are in an area that is unconnected, and a lot of this. And this is not just peculiar to Namibia. It is like that everywhere else in the world, and not just also particular to the African continent. The gender digital divide is influenced by all those things that we've spoken about: issues of access, but also issues of affordability, education levels. It goes all the way to all those issues. Yeah. I don't know, Amanda, if that answered your question or there was another leg to the.
No, that answered my question. Thank you so much, Nashilongo. I will pass it on to Sigi to cover any aspects that you might not have covered from both a society human rights approach as well as a legal approach.
Thanks, Amanda. I think Nashilongo has largely, covered most of the major difficulties. I think what I want to reemphasize is that gender power dynamics are still a very huge obstacle to internet access, and across the globe, but particularly, these issues are more prevalent on the continent and more prevalent in rural areas. It's very unfortunate that for a country that where women constitute the large percentage of the population, that cost implications still play a very huge factor in women being unable to access and to use the internet, and which consequently exacerbates the gender digital divide. I think this then consequently affects the conclusion that the internet is a gender neutral resource, which as well is, it's also that itself is also a very unfortunate recognition. And it then consequently brings to the fore the issue of power dynamics that exist within societies, right? So one of the, I guess, some of the areas that we can magnify this in is around the issues of employment, right? So we witness gender pay gaps still being especially prevalent and disproportionately affecting women more than men. There's the issue of education, because we all know that gaining access to formal education, I don't say amounts to you being able to access the internet, but it plays a very large role in that particular regard. And we witness numerous drives across the continent pushing for the girl child to gain access to education. Poverty issues also play a very huge role, as Nashilongo alluded to. I think some of the other issues that also exacerbate these gender disparities is skills, right? So we often talk about digital skills and values. There are also social and cultural barriers, and I can see that somebody in the comments section magnified the issue of cultural beliefs and practices. And so one of the comments that we've had from some of the individuals who we interact with as an organization is that women are restricted in certain areas from either gaining access, from using their mobile devices, right? So either the husband controls, as Nashilongo pointed, either the husband controls the use of that particular device, which consequently affects the time that somebody has to access to use the internet to essentially use this particular tool for the not just for the empowerment, but also to contribute towards this towards this particular space. So in conclusion, yes, there is a gender digital divide. Yes, there are implications about neutrality. We talk about neutrality often, and these are just some of the unfortunate realities that we have to contend with when we talk about access to the internet. And this conversation then spills over into other marginalized groups, including persons with disabilities. So women who are disabled face even more heightened disadvantages than women who are able-bodied, amongst other factors. So the challenges are numerous, and I suppose more solutions are especially pertinent to enable us to address these particular problems.
Thank you so much both for answering that. And as Ethan rightly pointed out, one of the biggest issues is also culturally, and he gave an example that I have heard all too often, that how can you have a cell phone as a woman or as a girl child when the men in the family do not have a cell phone? How can you be on the internet when the men in the family are not able to access the internet? And sadly, those are issues that affect people every single day. And those are sadly some of the issues that laws and policies cannot necessarily assist with. We can have the phones, but we also do need to be able to change people's perspective of taking up the use of the internet. Having spoken about that, and thank you, Ethan, you've just a question just popped into my mind. And I'll ask Nashilongo to answer this. Bram, I will come to you. I've not forgotten about you. Nashilongo, could you please talk about issues around people trusting using the internet? I know
The
when
internet, yes.
Yes, I know when things such as mobile banking started coming up, and I know now it's getting a lot more in intense because people don't even use money anymore. You have to do the banking over the internet. There are a lot more things. You have to order a taxi over the internet. You can order food over the internet. And during COVID, when you're locked down and you couldn't necessarily go to the supermarket, people were buying food off of WhatsApp, which is essentially off of the internet. How do you think trust has played into internet access? Are you noticing people are trusting the internet a lot more, or there's still that distrust of I will pay for something and it will not come, or I just do not trust not being able to see someone in front of me when I give someone money?
And yes, thank you, Amanda, for coming back to me. So the issue of trust and safety on the internet has also been a very a big barrier to women getting on the internet. For instance, I'll be referring to some of the research that has been done by the World Wide Web. They've been doing this research, I think, for about 10 years, and they've researched over 20 countries, and Namibia being one of them, and that relates to the report that I've mentioned earlier. It is that uh, women already getting online for women about get put aside the issues of affordability, skills, and availability. The violence online, for instance, has been one of the issues that has been contributing to the gender digital divide. That, of course, we have seen that women get more bullets compared to men. But even when men are bullied, more and more women are bullied on the basis of just because they are women. For instance, you'll be bullied because of the way you are wearing your lipstick or how you look like. Are you fat? Maybe you are not fat, but you are too skinny. You are like a giraffe. So a lot of that violence also puts away women from the internet. The, the so that is the other thing. The other thing is also the services that is offered online, and we're not I'm going to come back to the issues of the food and ubers and but but on what do the women can or must do on the internet. For instance, for a typical young woman who maybe is of reproductive age, getting online would mean that I'm getting on to find information about how to protect myself from contracting STIs, for instance, or from I need information on how to access abortion services, or I am getting online to find jobs, for instance. So there's a lot of reasons why women would want to get online. But in most cases, for instance, from our research, and this is not just a particular concern for Namibia, is that these services are not found online. And the online space is actually, or the internet is actually the right places to come and get that kind of services. Because if I have to go to the clinic, my mother's friend who works at the clinic will tell my mother that I was there and I'm looking for contraceptives, or I came to pick up condoms. And we know that the African society places that societal values on a woman, like, oh, if you go into the clinic to find condoms or contraceptives, it's possibly because you're sexual active. And um, f- our African women, you even if you know that your daughter doesn't stay most of the time at home, you don't want to think of them as being sexually active and things like that. So there's a need for the internet to not just being accessible, to be affordable, but also to be able to provide services that are not just services, but to be to up to contain information that is of beneficial to men. I think there's been a connotation or some research or a dialogue or discourse that the internet is very men. It talks about politics. It talks about things that are traditionally not attractive to attractive to women, or that if women are coming online, they are there to create content on how to cook and how to take care of the babies, amplifying those traditional roles. And there's absolutely no nothing wrong with being with that, but that the services that are found online should be beneficial, should be able to build a woman. And that's, I think, some of the reasons why women are not coming online. So that aside, your question has to do with um, other services online and the issues of safety. For instance, in Namibia, and I think this goes on in a lot of countries, when the internet became affordable and is accessible, a lot of young people, especially even older women, have gotten into this business of telemarketing, and I think we have all seen it. I don't know if it's the right term to use. For instance, I have a lot of cousins who are selling Brazilian hair using just their WhatsApp statuses, or selling those clothes that are usually not accessible in your markets, and they are using that the internet to do that, and they are able to ship it, to send it to you wherever you are, especially in the country. So for some reason, to a certain extent, which is very small, it has also provided business opportunities to the internet, to the women. So that speaks to the economic aspects of it. So looking at Uber and Uber Eats and Uber as a mode of transportation, as it is. I mean, of course, these are as much also provided opportunities for women. There also has been a lot of safety issues in that relation. For instance, you have heard of seen how a woman would order food, and food was delivered to their place or apartment, and that was the last time that woman was seen or heard, because unfortunately they fell victim to this, I don't know, it's not even domestic violence, just to be killed. So these online spaces, business services, as much as they possibly benefit men in general, more and more women are thinking twice about engaging on these services, because it causes, or it's like a risk to take. You could easily be killed. You could be easily be driven away by Uber and never be heard about. It can be that safety issue really is contributes to the digital divide in general. So yeah, let me end there. But I think I had more examples if this comes around again.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for going into all those issues, because you are definitely right. Some of those, especially with safety and security while on the internet, I'll speak as a woman here. It does feel as though women are more attacked on the internet, and
Correct.
sadly, there isn't much of a community supporting women that are being attacked on the internet. And like you've said, you will find, I don't know if this is different in other countries, but in South Africa, you'll find that rarely will you get a female Uber driver. It is usually a male Uber driver. So already in a country where gender-based violence has skyrocketed in the last few months, using an Uber that is being driven by a man is quite scary. It is a daunting experience. But e-services such as Uber are supposed to make life a lot easier, but they've definitely
True.
made life trickier for women, because you think twice before you get into an Uber. You think twice before you post a weight loss picture, because I saw one yesterday where people then bullied her for having lost weight. So it feels to an extent that it's really not a safe place to be on the internet for women, yet we are trying to get more women onto the internet. And that is just one of the issues that has to do with the gender digital divide. I will move on purely because of time, and I'm going to come to Bram. I want us to talk about internet shutdowns. Could you explain to us technically what is an internet shutdown? I believe the term internet shutdown is an incorrect term. Uh, I don't know if you can go press on a switch, click off the internet, and the internet is shut down. But could you explain to us what actually happens when people say the internet has been shut down? What happens when I can't send a WhatsApp message, or I can't access a certain site while I'm in South Africa, but someone in Malawi can access that site? Could you explain to us all those things from a technical perspective?
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think that is a very broad conversation, and I think just to come back to my earlier question, which I had said I had promised to tackle it later. There are currently 46 active internet exchange points located in 42 cities in 34 African countries. So that is the current statistics in terms of the internet exchange points, peering or exchanging traffic between countries and Europe and within the region itself. Now, remember, I think we can build the issue of internet shutdowns from the same concept of the internet exchange points. Most of the countries, I think, have maybe one or two, points of getting the internet from the sea in the country. And I think there are few instances where government would have actually to go to the undersea part of the submarine cable and actually cut it, like even really cutting it. And I think I'm not sure if this was actually what happened to the Anglo 4 part of Cameroon last year, if I'm not mistaken, where you'd actually cut the actual cable. That is number one way of you shutting down the internet. But the second technical way, and I think this relates more with what an example you gave in terms of what happens that you are able to access the same content, but someone in Malawi is not able to access that content because it's been blocked or shut down. Um, because I spoke about the peering policies that keep the internet going, so using technologies, and this is one of the biggest technologies like BGP, which is Border Gateway Protocol, that allows different operators with unique autonomous numbers to trust each other on the internet and exchange routes in terms of, I would say, oh, hello, this is my ASN number or autonomous number that uniquely identifies me on the internet, but I would like for you to help me get my traffic to London, and then someone in South Africa also would say, oh, hi, I can actually help you with getting your content to London through this path. And so when the government says we want to shut down internet, it's basically looking at it from the routing point of view, where you say shut down all the conversations that are happening in the background to say, can you move our traffic from point A to point B? Um, because we don't want people to communicate with the outside world. And that is where now we've seen in many countries where internet shutdowns have been very big, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, people try and use VPN services. The reason for the VPN services is so that you circumvent these kind of technical barriers to still use an IP address or a unique identifier that is from London, that allows you then to go outside and browse the content as though you are from London, but you're from the country that you're actually accessing it from. So, but in a nutshell, that is what you would call internet shutdown, the technical way of closing all the internet superhighways to send traffic and receive traffic to the international world.
Thank you so much for explaining that, Bram. I will pass it on to Sigi. Please explain to us from a legal perspective. Do our laws? You can stick to Kenya if you like, or any other countries you might want to use as examples. But do our laws allow us to shut down the internet, considering that the internet is a human right, but all human rights can be limited? So explain to us internet shutdowns from a legal perspective.
Thank you, Amanda. I actually just want to clarify that some rights can be limited, others are completely inviolable. And I guess we won't delve into that issue. So from a theoretical perspective, even rights that are limited can be, limitations can be imposed on these particular rights, including the right to freedom of expression, access to information, amongst others. However, what international law and international standards magnify is that these restrictions must adhere to the three-part test. So it must be legitimate, which means it must have a legal grounding. It must be necessary, and here we're talking about, a balancing rights, and it must be proportionate, such that, the action or the measure that is being taken by the government must, as I alluded to before, not inadvertently or impact individuals' abilities to exercise their rights in a manner that is not justifiable. So, from a theoretical perspective, yes, rights can be limited. Yes, internet shutdowns, and I also really dislike using this word, but kill switches, as Access now likes calling them, or throttling, or temporary disruptions, restricting access to the internet or to a specific website, are unfortunately permissible in very many countries. So Rwanda, for example, has provisions that permit the minister to take over, for lack of a better word, or rather to order telecommunications network providers to shut down the internet, or rather to restrict access to those particular services. And this is where we see the role that business and human rights essentially plays, and the role that private entities play in facilitating internet shutdowns. Countries across the world have various pieces of legislation that permit shutdowns. The US has its and there've been numerous legislative and constitutional petitions that challenge some of these particular provisions. I don't know whether you want me to go into the types of pieces of legislation that actually exist, but I will mention that unfortunately the ITU, which is the International Telecommunication Union, which is the major intergovernmental agency tasked with setting telecommunication standards as well as building norms in this particular technical context, actually provides license to ITU member countries to block telecommunications on various grounds. So national security, where this particular communication is contrary to established laws, or where it runs counter to public order, where it runs counter to decency. And essentially, these ITU provisions, so they don't just permit countries to block, they also permit countries to suspend some of these services. Now, whether these provisions have been invoked or not is a different question, but we do know that countries across the world, as has previously been alluded to by Bram, increasingly rely on very broad, vague definitions such as national security to facilitate some of these very restrictive and unjustifiable limitations on individuals' rights. And we know that they often co-opt, or rather force, for lack of a better word, providers of internet and telephony services to essentially sing the tune of the government, because at the end of the day, if you're getting your license from the government, then there are certain instances where licenses actually have provisions that state, when you're given an order under this particular legislative provision, you must adhere to that particular order. And we have noted several instances where service providers push back, but these instances are few and far between. So yes, so that is my response to that question. There are legislative and regulatory provisions that do permit disruptions. And a majority of constitutional challenges are essentially taking place, not just at national levels, as we saw in Uganda in 2016, but also at the regional level, in the recent ECOWAS decision that made a decision on Togo's internet. Apologies, I seem to have run out of breath, so I shall stop there. Thank you, Amanda.
It's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that aspect and explaining to everyone that internet shutdowns are permissible in a lot of countries, and there are definitely pieces of legislation that allow for the internet to be shut down. And I will put a proviso depending on certain things happening. And usually, I do know it's usually an issue of state security. I think internet shutdowns or kill switch, as Access now calls it, is a topic we could discuss for weeks, to be honest. But because we are running out of time, I will ask for final thoughts. We can keep them short. I will start with Bram. Do you have any final thoughts, things you want to add that we didn't discuss that you feel should have been discussed?
Thank you so much. I think I'm very big on internet access and affordability, especially in Africa. And I feel that as government, it's just unfortunate we didn't have maybe one of the government representatives on the panel. But we need policies that really help us to address the challenges that we have in the region. So we have, I think, the universal service fund that I think each member country has. We have so many initiatives that could actually help us to tackle issues of taxation on gadgets and devices, to make sure that the prices of those actually go drastically down so everyone can afford. And then we have the issues of taxation themselves, in terms of the internet taxation. In other countries like my country, we have a heavy taxation on the internet bundles themselves. Government can come up with policies that can actually help us bring down those costs. And then one last bit is the very aspect of the existence of the regulators in each and every country to be able to frame the spectrum licensing in such a way that it motivates small and medium service providers to go in rural areas and offer internet services, so that they offer these services at a very affordable and cheap prices, um, in the end promoting universal access, as enshrined in the 2030 UN 2030 vision. But that'll be my main take. That I think we need policies that really address the challenge. And COVID, I think, has exposed some of these gaps, and it's time we develop policies and laws that address and fill those gaps as African countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Bram. Nashilongo, final thoughts?
Um, I don't know. I need to check. Oh yeah, okay. I'm not muted. So my final thought is that, like Bram said, that there's a need for progressive legislation on the continent, in just to make sure, for instance, that communities who are willing to build their own networks so to build their own means of connectivity, are legally and from a license point of view are allowed to do that with little hassle, with less implications when it comes to licensing fees. I think that's very important, but also that it's important, I think, at this point that African governments can think beyond the standard broadband pricing, setting the standard broadband pricing for their countries, even below the ITU recommended or Broadband Commission recommended 241, which is 2 gig for the price of I want to believe it is for the price of income, or 1% of the income per household, that there are people who can benefit so much from the internet, but they are not able to get it. And that also that we move away, or governments must promote the internet beyond the telecommunications service providers, who are your bigger companies, and who really, if they are setting up a tower in your area, it's because they found profitability. But to really concentrate on the, from a human rights perspective, just to afford people access to the internet, because it can be just the meaning of somebody who, it could be just the decision, the deciding factor of somebody languishing in poverty, or getting their ideas, their innovative ideas ground, solving their community problems, finding solutions, from being connected. The internet is a very good tool. It's an important tool for psychosocial development, and it should be seen that, and the commercialization aspect of it, I think, needs to be relooked from a government point of view, and the regulator, I think, needs to get on board as well. Thank you,
Thank you.
Amanda, and thank you so much for my fellow panelists and everybody who have joined on the discussions, including our panelists, or our colleagues who have joined in just to listen. We hope we have got enough chance to engage with everybody. Thank you so much.
So much, Nashilongo. Sigi, final thoughts from you?
Thanks, Amanda. I have so many points that I wanted to conclude, but I think I'll just try and restrict them to about 3 or 5 points. I think one of the issues that we've noted as an organization is that there needs to be a more concerted effort to harmonize regional policies, because this is extremely crucial for cross-border connectivity issues, and also very important for individuals living along border areas. One of the issues that we noted within the East African community level, there's an entity known as the East Africa Communications Organization, which is tasked with harmonizing these regional policies. Now, one of the challenges that they magnify in their reports is, just to break down what they're stating, is that legislators essentially need to get serious, right? So when members don't attend sessions aimed, or rather geared towards, ensuring a harmonization of policies for the greater good of individuals living within a particular region, then, I mean, really, as they magnify, there's just a very huge gap in terms of harmonization. The second point that I really want to magnify is that there are certain circumstances, as we noted when we were talking about the issues within the gender digital divide, but also issues faced generally within the digital inclusion conversation, is that there are certain areas where affirmative action must be promoted, and where specific and measurable, wins and priorities are specified for these particular marginalized groups, and where there are custodians who can be held accountable where they fail to achieve these particular priorities, right? Government is the primary duty bearer, and if it's not fulfilling its responsibility to its citizens, then it must be held to account, and specific individuals must be allocated to bear the brunt of that particular inability to fulfill. I am not advocating for criminalization of anything, so please don't misquote me. The other point that I really wanted to magnify is that market competition is such a major issue. So there's a need for the communications regulators to get in touch with competition authorities, right? Because we know that competition, necessarily affects the issue of cost, the issue of reliability, the issue of affordability. And we have one very notorious service provider in Kenya, I will not mention their name, who is increasingly being pushed out of the market because it's unable to provide sufficient and reliable services, which are then being taken over. That market share is being taken over by other competitors. So there is a need for regulators in the communication space to sit down with regulators in the competition arena in order to harmonize and ensure that market competition issues, monopolization is broken down. I guess one of the countries where the issue of monopolization still remains a core issue is Ethiopia, and we are extremely just glad that they are taking strides towards liberalizing their market, but still a lot of work to be done. The last point before I truly run out of breath is that we need to update the way we conceptualize internet access. We need to update the way we conceptualize affordability to the internet. And here, Nashilongo and Bram have both alluded to the issue, have both extensively magnified, the issue of community networks being extremely crucial in expanding connectivity to rural communities. But I think that there's, such a wide arena for innovation that must be nurtured, not just by governments, but also within ourselves as well. I think one of the striking examples of innovation on the continent was the introduction of Alphabet's balloons, right, which provide services using these stratospheric balloons. So we need to shift towards, instead of adopting established methods, we should try and, as a continent, look for innovative methods that are cost effective, that don't require the laying down of terrestrial fiber cables that is extremely expensive. So just shifting towards more reliable, cost-friendly, innovative means of providing connectivity to individuals. Because at the core of this discussion, Amanda, and as everyone else has alluded to, is individuals, as I mentioned earlier, is individuals' ability to exercise freedom of choice, to empower themselves, to access, economic opportunities amongst others. And so these are some of these are in sum my closing remarks, and I will stop there. Thank you to Bram and to Nashilongo, and thank you to you as well, Amanda, for moderating this particular session, and thank you to everyone who attended this session. I hope there are some questions that have been raised that we can hopefully address either here or offline. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for your closing remarks. I do believe this is a discussion that can go on and on. We didn't even touch on community networks. I think that is a very important initiative. I think that's an initiative that speaks to our continent and some of the issues regarding infrastructure that we are facing as a continent. But there are also several other issues that we unpacked today. And thank you so much to our panelists for making the time to be here and for, talking us through all of those particular issues. We have run out of time. We're left with 2 minutes. And if there's anyone that has any questions, whether you are on the Twitter platform, you're on the website, or you're watching right now on Skype, please, pop in those questions onto the Africa iShare platform. Those questions will be answered. They'll be passed on to the panelists, and we'll try our best to answer any of the questions. But generally, on social media, let's keep this discussion going. I will pass on to Christine so that Christine can just close off for us.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join the discussions, and we really appreciate this. And to briefly introduce myself. I'm one of the coordinators of Africa Asia. And what we try to do on this platform is to have as many discussions that affect Africa ongoing, with the hope that there will be people who are like-minded, who can share ideas and who can learn from each other. And the whole point uh, is to have these kinds of discussions that give thought and share uh, information, and also give people an opportunity to ask and get expert opinions on such things. So I thank you very much for everyone who joined, and I thank all the panelists and Amanda for moderating this session. And we will be having the next discussion on internet access and more on digital talk on the 26th of November. But thank you so much, and we greatly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the discussion. If you like the discussions, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and follow us on social media on Facebook, Africa Asia platform, on Twitter, Africa Asia. Thank you.